The widower pulled out one chair, and the orphan girl forgot how to breathe. The first time Clara Finch sat in the Hale kitchen, she did not sit at all. She stood near the wash basin with her supper balanced in one hand, eating slow and quiet while the family table sat only 6 steps away. 6 steps were not far for most folks. For Clara, they were the length of her whole life. The kitchen was warm from the stove, and rain tapped softly against the window glass. Outside, a bay horse shifted under the lean-to, rattling a loose board with its hoof. Inside, 3 children sat around a pine table worn smooth by years of elbows, bread plates, and family talk. At the head of that table sat Gideon Hale, a widowed rancher with tired eyes and shoulders that looked like they had carried winter too long. Clara kept her gaze on her plate. She had learned young that looking around too much made people think you wanted something, and wanting was dangerous for a girl who had never belonged to anyone. She was 22, though hardship had taught her to move like someone older. Her dress was plain brown wool, mended at both cuffs. Her hands were red from lye soap and work. A thin scar crossed one knuckle, white as thread. She had no wedding ring, no mother's brooch, no family Bible with her name written inside. The county record called her Clara Finch, but no one had ever told her whether Finch was truly hers or only a name somebody chose because a baby had to be called something. She had been left first at a church door outside Abilene, wrapped in a blue shawl with no note. From there she had gone to a poorhouse, then to a farmer's wife who needed help with laundry, then to a cousin who needed help with hogs, then to a boarding kitchen in Dodge City where she slept on flour sacks and ate what was left after paying guests had finished. Every place called itself shelter. None had called itself home. So when Gideon Hale hired her to cook and keep house at his ranch outside Mercy Ridge, she came ready to work, not to hope. Hope was how a person got hurt. Gideon had lost his wife, Ruth, the year before when fever moved through the valley like a bad wind. It took her in 6 days and left him with 3 children and a house that had gone quiet in all the wrong ways. Eli, the oldest, was 11 and already wearing his father's old hat, as if grief could be handled by standing straighter. June was 8, with dark, serious eyes and a habit of folding herself into corners where nobody could ask her what she felt. Little May was 4 and still looked at the bedroom door some mornings as if her mother might step through it carrying a brush and a ribbon. The Hales needed help. Clara needed a roof. That was all it was supposed to be. She had cooked beans with salt pork, fried potatoes crisp at the edges, and made biscuits soft enough that little May smiled for the first time since Clara arrived that afternoon. Gideon had thanked her with a nod, not too warm and not unkind. Eli had eaten like a boy, pretending not to be hungry. June had watched Clara from beneath her lashes, silent as a candle flame. When the food was served, Clara took what remained and carried it to the wash basin, where hired girls belonged. No one spoke for a moment. Then Gideon's fork stopped halfway to his mouth. "Miss Finch," he said. Clara turned at once. "Yes, Mr. Hale." He looked at her plate, then at the empty chair along the side of the table. Ruth's chair, Clara guessed, the one nobody had touched since she came in. "What are you doing over there?" Clara blinked. It seemed a strange question. "Eating my supper, sir." "At the wash basin." "I don't mind it." "I do." The words were quiet, but they crossed the kitchen like thunder crossing a plain. Eli looked up. June's eyes widened. Little May kept chewing a biscuit, unaware that anything in the world had changed. Clara tightened her fingers around the plate. "I'm used to standing. I'll not be in your way." Gideon pushed back his chair. The wooden legs scraped the floor, and Clara flinched before she could stop herself. He noticed. A shadow crossed his face, not anger, but something sadder. He walked to her slowly, like a man approaching a frightened horse. "You cooked this meal," he said. "You worked over that stove while rain came through the roof seam and May cried over her tangled hair. You fed my children better tonight than I have managed in weeks. You are not eating in a corner." Clara could not answer. Her throat had closed around words she did not know how to say. Gideon reached for her plate, then stopped first, waiting. Not taking, waiting. That small kindness nearly undid her. She let him have it. He carried the plate to the table and set it before the empty chair along the side. Then he pulled the chair back. "Sit down, Miss Finch." Clara stared at it. A chair was only a chair, except when a person had spent her life being told by silence, by glances, by closed doors, and by scraps on tin plates that even a chair could be too much to ask for. "I shouldn't," she whispered. Gideon's voice softened. "In this house, people who share the work share the table." Eli looked from his father to Clara. June's hands curled around her cup. Little May lifted her biscuit and said, "She can sit by me." That did it. Not all at once, not with some grand feeling of joy. Clara did not suddenly believe she was wanted. She did not trust warmth just because it touched her once, but her knees went weak and the plate on the table looked like something from another life. Slowly, she crossed those 6 steps. The floor creaked under her boots. The lantern trembled in the draft. Gideon held the chair steady while she lowered herself into it like she was afraid it might vanish. For the first time in all her memory, Clara Finch ate supper beside a family instead of behind one. No one made a speech after that. Gideon sat down and passed the butter. Eli asked whether the mare would foal before Sunday. June, after a long silence, slid the honey closer to Clara without meeting her eyes. Little May leaned against Clara's sleeve with the trusting weight of a child too young to guard her heart. Clara ate 3 bites and tasted none of them. Across the table, Gideon watched the rain streak the window, but his eyes kept returning to the young woman sitting stiff as a fence post in Ruth's old chair. He had not meant anything more than decency. A meal, a chair, a place among them because no decent man let a woman eat standing after she cooked for his children. But something had shifted in the room. Not loudly, not enough for anyone outside that kitchen to notice. Still, Gideon felt it. The house, which had been holding its breath for a year, seemed to breathe once. And Clara Finch, who had never trusted a welcome in her life, kept one hand hidden in her lap, gripping the worn edge of her skirt so hard her fingers shook. Because the chair beneath her felt warm. Because little May had fallen asleep against her arm. Because Gideon Hale had pulled out a place at his table, as if it had been waiting for her. And because, deep down where fear lived, Clara knew the cruelest thing the world could do now was let her start wanting to stay. By morning the rain had passed, but the earth still held its smell. Wet dust, pine smoke, and horse sweat drifted through the Hale ranch as Clara stepped out onto the back porch with a bucket in each hand. The sky over Mercy Ridge had opened pale and clean, with strips of gold rising over the low hills. Chickens scratched near the woodpile. Somewhere beyond the barn, Gideon's voice carried in a low command to Eli as they worked with the horses. Clara stood a moment longer than she meant to. She had slept in a narrow room off the kitchen, with one small window and a quilt folded at the foot of the bed. It was the best room she had ever been given for work. Not fine, not large, but hers for the night. That alone had kept her awake. The bed did not have flour dust on it. No one had stored tools under it. No one had told her to leave the door open in case she was needed. Still, she had slept with her shoes beside the bed facing outward, ready to run. Old habits did not die just because a man pulled out a chair. Inside, the house had begun to stir. A floorboard creaked. Little May coughed once in her sleep. June moved softly in the room she shared with her sister. Clara set down one bucket, rubbed her palms on her apron, and went back in to light the stove. Work steadied her. Work was clear. Work had no hidden meaning. Flour, water, fire, salt, eggs, coffee. Those things did not pretend to love a person and then send her away when winter came. She made breakfast without humming, though a tune came near her lips once and she swallowed it down. By the time Gideon and Eli came in, the biscuits were already browning, bacon snapped in the skillet, and coffee steamed dark in the pot. Eli's cheeks were red from morning air. Gideon hung his hat by the door and paused when he saw the table set for 5. Clara saw his eyes move to the plates. She had set one for herself because he had told her to, but setting it had been harder than washing every sheet in the county. Her hand had hovered over the table, holding the plate like it might offend the room. Then little May, still in her nightdress, had come in rubbing her eyes and said, "Clara sits there." So Clara had set it down. Now Gideon saw it and said nothing at first. He only walked to the washstand, cleaned his hands, and sat. That silence helped more than praise would have. At breakfast, Eli talked too much about a loose fence near the south pasture. Clara noticed he spoke mostly to his father, but his eyes kept slipping toward her, measuring whether she would stay, whether she would talk, whether she would change the way the house felt. June did not speak at all. She ate with care, breaking her biscuit into tiny pieces and lining them along the edge of her plate before dipping each in gravy. Her dark hair had not been properly combed. It hung uneven on one side, tangled near the back. Clara noticed, she said nothing. After the men left for the pasture, Clara washed dishes while May sat on the floor with a wooden horse missing one leg. June stayed at the table, her hands folded tight. "You needn't help," Clara said gently, not turning around. "I wasn't going to," June said. Her voice was so small Clara almost missed it. Clara kept washing a cup. "That is all right." June watched her. "Pa says you'll keep house." "That is what he hired me for." "Folks leave." The cup slipped in Clara's hands but did not fall. She set it down slowly in the rinse basin. Outside, a horse snorted. The wind moved the wet branches against the window. Clara turned and found June staring at the table, not at her. "Yes," Clara said, "they do sometimes." June's mouth tightened. Mama left. Clara dried her hands on her apron and stood very still. There were easy lies a grown person could tell a child. Your mama did not want to leave. She is watching you. She is still with you. Some of those things might even bring comfort, but Clara knew what it felt like to be given words that did not match the ache inside. She knew how a child could hear kindness and still feel abandoned by the shape of an empty room. So she chose carefully. "Your mama was taken," Clara said. "That is not the same as leaving." June's eyes lifted then, sharp and wet. "She didn't say goodbye to me." Clara felt that one in her chest. She crossed the room and sat in the chair beside the girl, not too close. Close enough to be there, far enough to let June decide. "Maybe she thought she had more morning left," Clara said. "Most folks do." June blinked hard once then again. She did not cry. Children who had been hurt often tried not to spend tears where grown folks could see them. Clara understood that too well. After a long quiet, Clara reached into her apron pocket and pulled out a small blue ribbon, faded almost gray. She had found it tied around a bundle of old towels in the pantry that morning. She laid it on the table between them. "I found this," she said. "Was it hers?" June touched the ribbon with 2 fingers. "Mama wore blue on Sundays. Would you like it in your hair?" June pulled her hand back. "I don't care." But she did not leave. Clara waited. The stove clicked softly as it cooled. Little May made a low humming sound to her broken horse. Dust floated in the morning light like tiny gold seeds. At last June turned around in her chair, giving Clara her back. Clara took the comb from the shelf. She worked slow, holding each section near the scalp so it would not pull. She did not scold the knots. She did not say the child should have asked sooner. She only worked the tangles loose strand by strand, the way a person might free thread from thorns. June's shoulders, stiff at first, slowly lowered. When Clara tied the blue ribbon at the end of one braid, June reached up and touched it. "She used to sing," June whispered. Clara's hand paused. "What did she sing?" June shook her head. "I forgot." That more than anything seemed to frighten her. Clara leaned down, her voice soft. "Forgetting a song is not forgetting a mother." June turned her face away fast, but not before Clara saw the tears. By noon, the sun had dried the yard, and Gideon returned with Eli for dinner. They stopped in the doorway at the same time. June sat on the floor beside May, showing her how to wrap a rag around the broken horse's missing leg. Her hair was brushed clean, tied with her mother's faded blue ribbon. She was not smiling, but she was there. In the room, not hidden in a corner, not folded away from the world. Gideon looked at Clara. She lowered her eyes at once and ladled stew into bowls. "Dinner is ready." He did not thank her in front of the children. Maybe he knew thanks would send her hiding. Maybe he only could not speak. But when Clara passed him the bread, his rough hand covered hers for the briefest moment, warm and steady. She froze. Then he let go. No one else seemed to notice except Eli. The boy's gaze sharpened under the brim of his too large hat. That evening after supper, Clara rose with her plate out of habit. She took one step toward the wash basin before she caught herself. The room went quiet. Her face burned. Gideon looked at the chair she had left, then back at her. He did not smile, he did not shame her, he only said, "There is still coffee." Clara stood with the plate in both hands. Little May patted the chair beside her. "Sit." June did not look up, but her fingers touched the blue ribbon in her hair. Eli watched like a guard at a gate. Clara turned back. She sat down again. It was only a chair, only coffee cooling in a tin cup, only the sound of rainwater dripping from the eaves outside. But in Clara's heart, something frightened and hungry lifted its head. And across the table, Eli Hale kept staring, as if he had already decided that anyone who came close enough to be loved could also leave close enough to break them. Eli Hale did not trust Clara Finch. He did not say so plain, because Gideon Hale had raised his boy not to be rude at his own table, but mistrust showed in small ways. Eli counted the biscuits after she set them down. He watched which cupboard she opened. He followed her with his eyes when she crossed the kitchen, as if she might fold the whole house into her apron and carry it away before dusk. Clara saw it. She knew the look because she had worn it herself in one house after another. It was the look of a child who had learned that good things had trapdoors under them. So she did not push him. She did not ask why he stared. She did not try to win him with sweets or soft talk. A frightened heart could smell a bargain quicker than a wolf smelled blood. Instead, she worked. She washed curtains that had gone gray with stove smoke. She patched May's stockings and turned June's old dress into something that fit better at the shoulders. She swept dust from under Ruth Hale's rocking chair, but did not sit in it. She opened windows in the morning and shut them before the night cold came down. She learned where Gideon kept the lamp oil, which floorboard complained near the pantry, and how May liked her corn mush with a little molasses stirred in. Eli noticed everything and gave her nothing. One afternoon, 3 days after Clara first came to the ranch, Gideon rode to Mercy Ridge for flour, nails, and news about a cattle buyer coming through from Fort Worth. He left Eli in charge of the woodpile and told the girls to mind Clara. Eli's mouth tightened at that. "I don't need minding," he said. Gideon paused by his horse. "No, but you need manners." The boy looked away. After Gideon left, the wind rose sharp from the north. It pushed dust across the yard in pale sheets and snapped the clean clothes on the line until the pins jumped. Clara had just pulled a kettle from the stove when she heard May cry out. Not a whining cry, a hurt one. Clara dropped the towel and ran. May stood near the chicken yard, both hands pressed to her cheek. Blood showed between her fingers where a loose wire had scratched her. June stood frozen beside her, white with fear. Eli came running from the shed, axe still in hand. "What happened?" he shouted. May cried harder. Clara reached her first. "Let me see, sweetheart." Eli stepped between them. "Don't touch her." Clara stopped at once. The words struck harder than he meant them to. She saw it on his face a second later, that little flash of shame, but he did not move. Clara kept her voice even. "She is bleeding, Eli. I can take care of her." Then put down the axe and bring her inside. His jaw worked. For a moment Clara thought pride would win. Then May sobbed Clara and reached around him. The boy flinched, as if his little sister had betrayed him. Clara did not take victory in it. She only held out her hand. May came to her, trembling. Clara carried her inside, washed the cut with warm water and pressed a clean cloth to it. The wound was shallow, more fright than harm, but May shook like a leaf. Clara settled her on her lap and murmured nonsense words, while June hovered nearby with tears shining in her eyes. Eli stood in the doorway. "You should have watched her," he said. Clara looked up. "Yes." He blinked, caught off guard. She did not defend herself. She did not remind him that May had wandered while Clara worked over their supper, and June tried to catch a loose sheet from the line. She did not tell him that children moved quicker than blame. She simply accepted the wound of his words because she knew they were not aimed only at her. Eli's face twisted. Mama watched her. The kitchen became very still. May's crying faded into little hiccups. June lowered her eyes. Clara held the cloth to May's cheek and felt the child's heartbeat tapping fast against her arm. I expect she did, Clara said. She never let things happen, Eli snapped. Clara could have told him no mother on earth could stop every fall, every fever, every broken thing. But that truth was too heavy for a boy already carrying more than his arms could hold. So she said, you miss her. Eli's eyes turned wet and furious. I don't, he said. Pa does, June does, May does, I help. You can help and still miss her. I said I don't. His voice cracked on the last word. That crack seemed to shame him more than tears would have. He turned and ran out so fast the screen door banged against the wall. May began crying again. June whispered, he goes to the creek when he's like that. Clara pressed a kiss to May's hair before she remembered she had no right to do such a thing. The child only leaned closer. If this moment touched your heart, stay with the story, because some children do not cry until someone is strong enough to hear them. Near sundown, Eli had not come back. The wind had calmed, but cold settled under the door. Gideon had still not returned from town. Clara stood at the window, watching the road and then the line of cottonwoods that marked the creek. She told herself the boy knew the land. She told herself he had gone there before. She told herself hired women did not go chasing ranch boys who had made it plain they wanted no comfort from them. Then she saw Gideon's old hat lying in the yard. Eli's hat. It had blown against the chopping block and lodged there empty. Clara's stomach tightened. She rapped May's cheek once more, told June to bar the door behind her, and took the lantern from its peg. Where are you going? June asked. To find your brother. He won't like it. No, Clara said softly, but he can dislike me inside the house. The creek path was narrow, muddy from the rain 2 nights before. Clara lifted her skirt with one hand and held the lantern with the other. The last light of day thinned behind the hills. Cottonwood leaves rattled overhead, dry as bones. She found Eli near the bend, sitting on a flat stone with his knees pulled up, his face turned away. I told you I don't need minding, he said before she spoke. Clara stopped several steps back. I know. Then go. I will once you stand up. He did not move. A long silence passed. Water slid over stones, whispering low. At last Eli said, she forgot May's birthday. Clara frowned gently. Who did? Mama, before she died, she was so sick she forgot. May kept asking for cake and Mama just looked at her like she didn't understand. His shoulders shook, but he kept his face hidden. I got mad at her. I got mad at Mama while she was dying. Clara's heart hurt for him so sharply, she almost reached out. Almost. Instead, she sat on a fallen log nearby, leaving space between them. When folks are taken by fever, she said, they are not always themselves near the end. I should have known. You were 11. I should have been better. No child should have to be good enough to make death kinder. Eli turned then. His face was streaked with dirt and tears, and he looked younger than he had since Clara first walked through the Hale door. For one breath, he stared at her like he hated her for seeing him. Then his mouth crumpled. Clara opened her arms, not wide, just enough. Eli crossed the space and dropped against her like his bones had given out. She held him there by the creek while the lantern light shook in the wind. She did not tell him hush. She did not tell him boys should be brave. She only held him while the grief he had guarded for a year finally found a place to fall. When Gideon's horse appeared at the top of the creek path, Clara looked up. Gideon sat still in the saddle, his face unreadable in the fading light. Eli pulled away fast, ashamed. But Gideon had seen. He had seen his son crying in the arms of the hired woman. And he had seen Clara Finch, holding him like she had been waiting all her life for someone to trust her with their sorrow. Gideon did not speak on the ride back. Eli rode behind him on the bay mare, small and tired, his father's coat wrapped around his shoulders. Clara walked beside them with the lantern in her hand, the yellow light swinging over mud, grass, and the pale stones along the creek path. No one mentioned the tears on Eli's face. No one mentioned the way he had clung to Clara as if the whole world might give way under him. That silence was mercy. When they reached the house, June opened the door before Clara could knock. She had been watching from the front window, her face pressed so close to the glass that her breath had fogged it. May stood behind her with one cheek bandaged and both hands twisted in her nightdress. "Eli," June whispered. "I'm fine," Eli said too quick. But he did not sound fine. He sounded worn thin. May ran to him and caught his sleeve. "Don't go creek no more." Eli looked down at her and something in his hard little face softened. "All right." Clara hung the lantern by the door and went to warm supper. The stew had thickened on the back of the stove. The biscuits were cold but still good. She moved quietly, giving the family room to settle. Gideon helped Eli out of the wet coat. June brought him dry socks without being asked. May leaned against his knee until he rested a hand on her head. It was such a small thing, that hand. But Clara saw Gideon turn away toward the dark window, and she knew he had seen it too. At supper, Eli sat near Clara and did not count the biscuits. He ate slowly, looking down most of the time. Once, when Clara passed him a cup of milk, his fingers brushed hers. He did not pull back like before. "Thank you," he muttered. The words were rough, almost swallowed. Clara nodded. "You're welcome." Across the table, Gideon's eyes lifted to her. In that look was more than thanks. It held wonder, worry, and a grief he had not yet set down. Clara felt heat rise to her face and bent over May's plate, cutting meat into smaller pieces. After the children were in bed, the house settled into the kind of quiet that came only after crying. The lamps burned low. Rainwater dripped from the porch roof, though the sky had cleared. Somewhere in the barn, a horse stamped once and then went still. Clara washed the supper dishes. Gideon stood near the stove with his hat in his hands, though there was no reason for him to hold it. "You did right tonight," he said. Clara kept her hands in the wash water. "He was by the creek. You went after him. He is a child. He told you things he has not told me." The pain in Gideon's voice made her look up. His face was turned toward the stove, the firelight showing the lines beside his mouth. He looked older than 36 in that moment, older than a man should look with 3 children asleep under his roof. Clara dried a plate slowly. Sometimes children speak easier when they think it won't hurt the person listening. Gideon swallowed. "He thinks his sorrow hurts me." "He loves you." "That was not what I asked." "No," Clara said softly, "but it is the answer." Gideon set his hat on the table and rubbed both hands over his face. For a moment he looked like a man standing in front of a door he did not know how to open. "I was with Ruth when she passed," he said. "The children were in the other room. Eli kept asking if he could see her. I told him no. I thought I was sparing him." Clara did not move. "He has carried anger over that. I know it. I see it in him. But every time I try to speak of her, he straightens up like a soldier and tells me chores need doing. He thinks if he bends, the house will fall." Gideon looked at her then. "How do you know so much about what a child hides?" The question came gentle, but it struck deep. Clara turned back to the basin. The water had gone cloudy with soap and grease. Her reflection trembled in it, pale and broken. "I used to hide plenty." "From who?" "Whoever had charge of me at the time." Gideon said nothing. That was the trouble with him. He did not rush to fill silence. He let it stand there, honest and waiting. Clara dried her hands and folded the towel over the line near the stove. "There was a woman in Salina who took me in when I was 12. Her name was Mrs. Bell. She had 6 children and needed washing done. I slept in the pantry on a corn sack. One winter night her youngest had a fever and cried for hours. I sat by him because his mother was worn out. He lived. Next morning she told me I had no right holding him like kin." Gideon's jaw tightened. Clara gave a faint shrug, though it cost her. "So I learned, help but not too close, feed them but don't love them, stay useful but don't get mistaken for family." Gideon's voice came low. "That is a cruel lesson." "It was a common one." "Not here." Clara looked at him. The words had come plain, with no shine on them. Not here. As if he could put a fence around this house and keep the old world outside. As if kindness spoken by one tired rancher could undo 22 years of being handed from door to door. She wanted to believe him. That wanting scared her more than Mrs. Bell ever had. Before she could answer, a small cry came from the girl's room. Clara moved first. Gideon followed, but stopped at the doorway as she stepped into the dim bedroom. May sat up in bed, tangled in the quilt, her bandaged cheek white in the moonlight. "Mama," she whimpered. June was awake too, lying still, eyes open. Clara knelt beside the bed. "I'm here, May." May reached for her without waking fully. Clara gathered the little girl close and rocked her gently. The child's warm face pressed into Clara's neck. June watched from her pillow, her fingers curled around the faded blue ribbon now tied to the bedpost. "Was it a bad dream?" Clara whispered. May nodded against her. "It has gone now. Don't go." Clara closed her eyes. Behind her, Gideon stood in the doorway, silent as a shadow. "I won't," Clara said, though she knew promises were dangerous things. May's grip loosened. Clara laid her back down and tucked the quilt beneath her chin. Then June spoke into the dark. "Can you sit till we sleep?" Clara glanced at Gideon, expecting him to say it was not proper, not needed, too much. He only nodded once. So Clara sat in the rocker that had been Ruth Hale's, the one she had cleaned but never dared touch. It creaked under her weight. May drifted off first. June fought sleep longer, watching Clara through heavy eyes. At last, even she gave in. When Clara rose, she found Gideon still outside the room. "You sat in Ruth's chair," he said. Clara's breath caught. "I'm sorry, I didn't think." "No," his eyes moved past her to his sleeping daughters. "I think she would be grateful someone finally did." The words settled over Clara like a hand, laid gently on a wounded place. Later, alone in her narrow room, she sat on the edge of the bed and untied her shoes. From her apron pocket, she took the small scrap of blue thread left from June's ribbon. She turned it over in her palm, then tucked it into the drawer beside the bed. She had no locket, no photograph, no letter from blood kin. But she had a thread from a child's ribbon. And that night, for the first time since coming to the Hale Ranch, Clara did not place her shoes facing the door. Spring loosened its grip on Mercy Ridge, and summer came in with warm wind, green grass, and a sun that lingered late over the Hale Ranch. Clara Finch had been there 7 weeks by then. 7 weeks was not long in the eyes of most people. It was hardly enough time for a field to turn, or a foal to steady on its legs, or a wound to heal clean. But inside that house, 7 weeks had changed the sound of living. The kitchen no longer felt like a place folks entered only because hunger drove them there. It had become the heart of the house again. The stove was blacked and shining. Dried herbs hung upside down from twine above the window. Fresh bread cooled under a cloth each morning. The pantry shelves, once nearly bare, held sacks of flour, jars of beans, dried apples, salt pork, and small crocks Clara had scrubbed until they smelled of sun instead of old dust. She had found the garden behind the house choked with weeds and half-dead rose. Ruth Hale had once tended it, Gideon said, but after the fever he had not had the heart to look at it long. So weeds took what sorrow left behind. Clara went at it one dawn with a hoe, before anyone else had risen. She worked in silence as the light crept over the hills. Her skirt hem grew damp, dirt clung to her boots. By breakfast, she had cleared 1 full row, and by the end of that week, the garden looked less like a grave and more like a promise. June helped first. She came out one morning holding a tin cup of water and stood at the edge of the rows. "You'll get your dress dirty," Clara said. June looked down at the faded blue calico. "It's already old." Clara smiled a little. "Then it is fit for honest work." June knelt beside her. May came next, mostly to pat dirt into mounds and speak kindly to worms. Eli pretended not to care, but after supper he dragged 2 heavy buckets from the well and set them by the garden gate. "I was going that way," he said. Clara looked across the yard, where the well was plainly not on his way to anywhere. "I'm obliged," she said. He shrugged and walked off, but his ears turned red. By midsummer, green beans climbed poles, tomatoes swelled under wide leaves, onions stood stiff in rows. Clara worked early and late, tying, watering, pinching, picking. She had a way with food, a patience that seemed born not of being taught, but of having known hunger too closely to waste even one good thing. When the first peaches came from an old tree near the creek, she made preserves. Gideon had ridden to town that morning, and the children gathered around the table while Clara peeled fruit into a basin. Peach juice ran down her wrists. Sugar sparkled in the bowl like crushed frost. The kitchen filled with sweetness so deep that May climbed onto a chair and sighed. "Smells like Sunday," she said. Clara laughed before she could stop herself. The sound surprised everyone, including her. It was not loud, not bold, just one clear laugh rising out of her chest and vanishing into the warm room. June looked up from wiping jars. Eli paused with a peach pit in his hand. May grinned like she had been given candy. Clara pressed her lips together, embarrassed. But the laugh had already happened. And nobody punished it. That evening, Gideon came home as Clara was pouring hot preserves into jars. He stopped in the doorway, hat in hand, and breathed in. "I remember that smell," he said. Clara's hand stilled. June lowered her eyes. Eli went quiet. For a moment, Ruth seemed to stand between them, unseen but present. Clara felt it and almost stepped back from the stove, as if she had touched something that did not belong to her. Gideon seemed to understand. He came forward slowly and lifted one of the filled jars toward the lantern. The peach preserves glowed golden, bright as captured sunset. "Ruth made them thin," he said gently. "Good but thin. Yours look like they could stand a spoon upright." The children relaxed. Clara let out the breath she had been holding. "I was taught by a cook in Wichita," she said. "She said fruit deserved respect if a body expected it to last winter." Gideon glanced at her. "Did she treat you well?" Clara thought of Mrs. Alder, who had shown her how to seal jars but made her eat in the hall. Good and cruel could live in the same person. That was one of the first things Clara had learned. "She taught me well," Clara said. Gideon heard the words she left out. His face softened, but he did not press. The next week, Gideon carried 6 jars into Mercy Ridge at Clara's request. She had asked if the general store might take them in trade for cloth and buttons. She expected little. Maybe a few coins, maybe nothing. He returned before dusk with an empty crate and more money than Clara had held at one time in her life. "The storekeeper's wife bought 2 before they reached the shelf," he said. "Reverend Cole took one for the church social. Mrs. Larkin said if you have plum next, she wants first claim." Clara stood at the table, staring at the coins in Gideon's palm. "For me?" she asked. Gideon frowned. "They are your preserves." "But the peaches came from your tree, the sugar from your account, and the work from your hands." He placed the coins on the table in front of her. Clara did not touch them at first. Her hands hung at her sides, trembling slightly. She had earned wages before, but wages were handed down like scraps. This felt different. This was not charity. This was not payment for being useful in someone else's house. This was something she had made. May leaned over the coins with wide eyes. "Are we rich?" Eli snorted, "No." June said softly, "Clara is." They all laughed at that, even Clara, though tears stood close behind the laughter. If you believe one small chance can change a wounded life, don't forget to stay with this story, because Clara's hardest test had not yet come to the Hale table. By August, Clara's jars sat in 3 homes, then 7, then half the town. Folks began asking for her peach preserves, her pickled beans, her spiced apples, her green tomato relish. They did not call her the orphan girl when they wanted something sweet for their biscuits. They called her Miss Finch, the woman at the Hale place who knew how to put summer in glass. At night, she kept the coins in a small cloth pouch inside her drawer beside June's blue thread. Sometimes she took them out and counted them, not because she cared so much for money, but because each coin proved she had not imagined the change in her life. She had a place at the table. She had children who called for her before they called for anyone else. She had work that was hers. And she had Gideon. He never spoke a word beyond what was proper, but Clara felt his kindness in the space he gave her. He made sure her name was written on the store account for her goods. He asked her opinion on the garden fence. He knocked before entering the pantry if she was inside. When she carried too much, he took one bucket without making a show of it. When she was tired, he noticed. That noticing was dangerous. One evening, after the children had gone to bed, Clara stood on the porch with a basket of mending. Gideon came from the barn, his sleeves rolled, his hair damp from washing at the pump. The sunset had turned the sky the color of ripe peaches. "You have brought this place back," he said. Clara looked down at the shirt in her lap. "The place was here before me." "No," Gideon said, "the house was." She did not know what to do with that. Before she could answer, a wagon appeared on the road, throwing dust behind it. It was Mr. Pike from the post office, driving hard though evening had nearly fallen. He pulled up by the gate and called Gideon's name. Gideon went to him. Clara watched from the porch, May's small stocking still in her hands. Mr. Pike handed Gideon a letter sealed in dark red wax. Even from where Clara sat, she saw Gideon's face change when he read the name. The warmth went out of him. Eli came to the doorway behind Clara. "Pa." Gideon did not answer at first. He looked toward the house, toward his children, then toward Clara. The letter hung in his hand like a storm cloud. "It's from Ruth's mother," he said. And somehow, before he opened it, Clara knew that someone far away had heard of the chair pulled out at Gideon Hale's table. Gideon did not open the letter at the gate. He held it in his hand while Mr. Pike turned his wagon around and rattled back toward Mercy Ridge, the wheels cutting through the dust like a knife through flour. The evening had been golden only moments before. Now the yard felt dimmer, though the sun had not yet gone down. Clara stood on the porch with May's small stocking clutched in her lap. Eli remained behind her in the doorway. June came to stand beside him, silent and narrow-eyed. Little May, hearing the change in the house without understanding it, wandered from the kitchen with a wooden spoon in her hand. "Who's coming?" May asked. No one answered. Gideon walked up the steps and passed into the kitchen. He laid the letter on the table, still sealed, as if it might bite him if he broke it too soon. Clara rose. "I'll take the children outside." "No," Gideon said. His voice was not sharp, but it stopped her. He looked at Eli, then June, then May. "This concerns all of us." Clara's heart sank at the word "us," because she did not know whether she belonged inside it or outside it. Gideon saw her standing apart, and after a quiet breath, he pulled out her chair. That simple motion nearly hurt. Clara sat. Only then did he break the seal. The paper crackled loud in the kitchen. Gideon read without speaking. His face hardened first, then tired, then still. Clara watched his thumb press against the page until the nail whitened. Eli could stand it no longer. What does she want? Gideon folded the letter once, then unfolded it again. "Your grandmother has heard that Miss Finch is living here." June's chin lifted. "She works here." Gideon looked at Clara. "She has also heard the town talks." Clara's face warmed. Town talk, there it was. The old dirty rag people used to wipe kindness from a clean thing. She had known it would come. Women at the store had smiled too sweetly when she delivered jars. Men tipped hats and watched too long. Mercy Ridge was small enough that a woman could not buy thread without someone wondering why she chose blue. Eli scowled. "Folks talk because they have nothing worth doing." Gideon's mouth twitched, but only for a second. "What else?" Clara asked quietly. Gideon did not want to answer. She could see that. He would have spared her if he could, but there are words that poison worse when hidden. "She says she is coming west." The room went so still that even May stopped tapping the spoon against her palm. "Here?" June asked. Gideon nodded. She believes she should see to the children's welfare. Eli's chair scraped back. "Our welfare is fine." "Eli," Gideon said. "No, she did not come when Mama died. She did not come when May cried every night. She did not come when June stopped talking. Now she hears Clara sits at the table and suddenly she cares." The words burst out of him hot and shaking. Clara looked down, but every word struck the place she kept hidden. Clara sits at the table, such a small sentence, such a dangerous one. Gideon folded the letter and set it beside his plate. Margaret Whitcomb is still your grandmother. Then she should know us, Eli said. Gideon's eyes darkened. Yes, she should. That ended the talk for a time. Clara rose and moved toward the stove because there was always work to do when a heart had no safe place to stand. She stirred beans that did not need stirring. She wiped a clean counter. She took down plates and set them out with hands she willed not to tremble. But supper was a poor thing that night. May asked twice whether the grandmother was bringing candy. June said nothing and ate almost nothing. Eli sat hard-faced, anger holding him upright. Gideon tried to speak of the west pasture, then gave up. The empty chair at the table seemed larger than before. Not Clara's chair, the one at the far end that had once belonged to Ruth. After the children went to bed, Clara wrapped the remaining bread and swept crumbs from the floor. Gideon remained by the table, the letter unfolded again in front of him. At last he said, "You need not fear Margaret." Clara kept sweeping. "I have known women like Mrs. Whitcomb," she said. "You have not known her." "No, but I have known the kind who can make a person feel low without raising her voice." Gideon looked toward the dark window. She loved Ruth. "I don't doubt it. She never approved of the West, never approved of me taking Ruth so far from St. Louis. When Ruth died, I wrote her. I asked if she wished to come. And she did not." "No," he rubbed a hand across his brow. "She said the journey would be too hard on her nerves." Clara stopped sweeping. Gideon gave a humorless breath. Now it seems her nerves have strengthened. Clara folded her hands around the broom handle. "She thinks I am a danger to the children." "I do not." "But she will." His eyes came to hers then. Clara. She hated how her name sounded in his voice. Gentle, steady, like something that could be kept. "I know how this goes," she said. "A woman like her will not shout first. She will look around. She will ask where I sleep. She will count how many times May reaches for my hand. She will see June's ribbon and Eli speaking to me, and every kindness will become proof against me." Gideon stood. Proof of what? That I forgot my place. The words left her before she could call them back. Gideon's face changed. He walked closer, but not too close. He had learned the distance at which Clara could still breathe. "Your place is not at the wash basin." She swallowed. "No one gets to decide that but this house," he said, "and this house has decided." Clara wanted to believe him so badly, she nearly wept. Instead, she turned away and leaned the broom against the wall. "Houses don't decide, Mr. Hale. People with money and names do." Gideon said nothing for a long moment. Then he spoke in a voice low enough that it almost sounded like a promise made to himself. "Then we will see what kind of name matters most." That night, sleep would not come to Clara. She lay in her small room listening to the house breathe. A loose shutter clicked. Boards settled. Somewhere down the hall, May murmured in a dream. Clara opened the drawer beside her bed and took out the cloth pouch of coins. Beneath it lay June's blue thread. She held both in her palm. A little money, a little thread. Proof, maybe, that she had been here. Proof, maybe, that leaving would not kill her. She got up before she knew she meant to and lit the lamp. Then she pulled her old carpet bag from under the bed. She did not pack it. Not yet. She only set it on the chair and stared at it while the lamp flame shook. By dawn, the bag was still empty. But Clara Finch had not put it away. Margaret Whitcomb arrived on a Thursday with 2 trunks, a black parasol, and the kind of silence that made even the horses uneasy. Her carriage came up the road just after noon, wheels bright with town dust, curtains tied back as if the woman inside wanted the whole ranch to know she was not afraid to look at it. Gideon had seen the dust first from the barn. Eli saw his father stop still, and that was enough to bring the boy running toward the house. Clara was in the kitchen, rolling dough for a blackberry cobbler. May stood on a stool beside her, dusting more flour on the table than on the crust. June sat near the window mending a sleeve, though she had taken 3 stitches in the same place because her eyes kept moving to the road. "She's here," Eli said from the doorway. May's face lit. Grandmother. June set the needle down. Clara wiped her hands on her apron and looked at the carpetbag still tucked beneath her bed in her mind, though it was hidden from sight. She had put it away that morning, not because she felt brave, but because May had come in early and asked if Clara would braid her hair with the yellow ribbon. A person could not pack a bag while a child was asking for ribbons. Gideon met the carriage near the gate. Margaret Whitcomb stepped down slowly, gloved hand resting on the driver's arm. She was dressed in black silk, though the day was warm, with a stiff collar at her throat and a small silver brooch shaped like a lily pinned at her breast. Her hair was gray, smooth, and pinned so tight it looked as if even a breeze would have to ask permission before touching it. She did not embrace Gideon. She looked past him to the house. "So this is where Ruth spent her last years," she said. Gideon removed his hat. "This is where she made her home." Margaret's eyes flicked back to him. Those are not always the same thing. Clara heard the words from the porch, and they settled cold in her stomach. Gideon turned. "Children." May ran first because she did not know enough yet to be careful with love. She crossed the yard with both arms open. Margaret looked startled, then bent stiffly and let the child kiss her cheek. "My, how you have grown," Margaret said. May leaned back, searching her face. "Did you bring candy?" Eli shut his eyes. June looked at the ground. For the first time, something like pain moved across Margaret's mouth. "I brought books and hair ribbons from St. Louis." May considered that. "Clara gives me ribbons." The yard went quiet. Margaret's gaze lifted and found Clara on the porch. No one had introduced them yet, but Clara felt known already. Not known as a person, known as a problem. Gideon spoke evenly. "Mrs. Whitcomb, this is Miss Clara Finch. Clara, Ruth's mother, Mrs. Margaret Whitcomb." Clara stepped down from the porch and folded her hands. "Ma'am." Margaret looked at Clara's plain dress, her flour-dusted apron, her work-roughened hands, and finally her face. "You are younger than I expected." Clara did not know what answer was wanted, so she gave none. "And you live in the house." "She does," Gideon said. Margaret's eyes stayed on Clara. "How convenient." Eli's jaw tightened. June reached for May's hand. Gideon's voice cooled. "The children needed care." "I am sure they did." The carriage driver carried the trunks inside. Margaret followed without asking if she was welcome. Clara moved to the kitchen because supper would not cook itself, and because her hands needed a task before they betrayed her. Margaret walked through the house like a judge through a courtroom. She noticed everything. The mended curtain, the clean shelf, the jars of preserves catching sunlight in the pantry, Ruth's old rocker near the girls' room, June's blue ribbon tied around one braid, May's hand finding Clara's skirt without thought, Eli standing between his sisters and the room as if he could guard them from what was coming. At supper, Clara set 6 plates. She hesitated at the last one, then laid it before her own chair. Margaret saw. Of course she saw. They sat with Gideon at the head, Margaret to his right, Eli and June along one side, May beside Clara on the other. The food was good. Beans with bacon, warm bread, fried squash, and the blackberry cobbler May had helped ruin and Clara had saved. For several minutes the only sounds were forks, cups, and the soft cry of a hawk outside. Then Margaret said, "Does the hired help customarily dine with the family in Mercy Ridge?" May frowned. "Clara ain't help." "May," Gideon warned softly. Margaret smiled without warmth. "Then what is she?" The question crossed the table and struck Clara full in the chest. No one answered. Eli's hand curled into a fist beside his plate. June stared at the blue pattern on the dish. Gideon set down his fork. "Miss Finch keeps this household," he said. "She cares for the children. She eats with us because she belongs in the room where her work and care are given." Margaret turned to him. "Belongs is a large word, Gideon." "It is the one I meant." Clara could feel her face burning. She wanted to vanish. She wanted to stand and carry her plate to the wash basin where the world made sense. But May leaned against her sleeve, warm and trusting, and June's eyes lifted just enough to meet hers. So Clara stayed seated. Margaret took a slow sip of water. Ruth wrote me often of this table. She said it was the first thing you built after the house. She said you promised her your children would grow around it. They have, Gideon said. Yes, Margaret replied, but I wonder whether they are growing in the right direction. The room chilled. After supper, Clara cleared plates while Margaret asked the children questions in the sitting room. She asked Eli about his lessons and frowned when he said ranch work came before Latin. She asked June to play the hymn Ruth had learned as a girl, though June's fingers shook so badly she could barely touch the keys of the small parlor organ. She asked May whether she remembered her mother's face. May looked confused, then frightened. Clara nearly stepped forward, but Gideon's eyes warned patience. I remember Clara's face, May said. Margaret went still. That night, long after the children were sent to bed, Clara stood in the pantry counting jars she did not need to count. She heard voices in the kitchen, low but sharp. She is not their mother, Margaret said. No one said she was Ruth, Gideon answered. You allow a servant girl to sit in my daughter's chair. I allow a good woman to care for my children. A good woman would know when her presence brings shame. Clara closed her eyes. Then Margaret spoke again, and every word landed clear through the pantry door. I will not leave those children here to be raised under scandal. If you will not dismiss her, Gideon, I will speak to Judge Harrow in town. Ruth was my daughter. I have means, standing, and family enough to give them a proper life. Clara's hand slipped from the shelf. One jar of blackberry preserves fell and shattered at her feet, dark sweetness spreading across the floor like a wound. The sound of breaking glass brought Gideon through the pantry door. Clara stood frozen among the pieces, her skirt hemmed dark with blackberry juice. The jar had burst wide across the floorboards, its sweet smell rising thick and sharp in the small space. Purple syrup ran between the cracks like spilled ink. For one terrible moment, no one moved. Then Gideon stepped forward. Clara, are you cut? She looked down at her hands as if they belonged to someone else. No. Margaret stood behind him in the kitchen doorway, straight-backed and pale with anger. Were you listening? Clara lifted her eyes. She might have apologized once. In another house, in another life, she would have dropped to her knees at once, picking glass with bare fingers, saying she was sorry for the jar, sorry for hearing, sorry for being present where her name was spoken like dirt. But May's voice from earlier still lived in her heart. Clara ain't help. And Gideon's voice followed it. It is the one I meant. Clara swallowed and said, Yes, ma'am, I heard. Margaret's mouth tightened. Then you know this cannot continue. Gideon turned. Enough. No, Gideon, it is long past enough. Margaret's gloved hands trembled, though whether from grief or pride, Clara could not tell. You are blinded by loneliness. I understand that more than you think. But those children are Ruth's blood. They are all that remains of my daughter. I will not see them forget her. Clara flinched. That was the cruel place Margaret knew how to touch. Not Clara's birth, not her work, not the town's whispers. Those were old stones Clara had carried many miles. But Ruth's, a dead mother's memory. That was sacred ground, and Clara had never wished to set one foot wrong on it. I have never tried to make them forget her, Clara said. Margaret looked at her coldly. You sit in her chair. I sat where Mr. Hale told me to sit. You braid her daughter's hair. June asked me. You hold her youngest child when she cries for mother. Clara's throat tightened, but she did not look away. Yes. Margaret took one step closer. And you do not hear how bold that is. Gideon's voice came low. Comforting a child is not bold. It is when it teaches the child to give a dead woman's place to a stranger. The pantry seemed to shrink around Clara. The shelves of jars, the flour barrel, the hanging sacks of onions, the broken glass at her feet. Everything held still, waiting for her to bend. Then a small sound came from the hall. June stood there in her nightdress, barefoot, with her blue ribbon hanging loose in one hand. Eli was behind her. May peered around his side, eyes wide and wet. They had heard enough. Children always did. Go back to bed, Gideon said, though his voice had lost its strength. June did not move. Her face was white, but her chin was lifted. Grandmother asked me to play Mama's hymn. Margaret turned. Yes, dear, I thought it would be good to remember. June's fingers closed around the ribbon. I couldn't remember the last part. Margaret's face softened for the first time. That is why such things must be practiced. Memory needs tending. June nodded slowly. Clara told me forgetting a song is not forgetting a mother. No one spoke. The words hung there like a lantern raised in a dark room. June stepped closer, though she stayed behind Gideon. I was afraid Mama would be gone if I stopped hurting all the time. I thought if I laughed, she would disappear. Clara never told me to stop missing her. She just sat with me when I did. May began to cry quietly. Eli put a hand on her shoulder. Margaret looked at the children as if she had expected obedience and found a locked gate instead. Eli spoke next, rough and low. You don't know what it was like here. Margaret stiffened. I know grief, young man. No, Eli said, and his voice cracked. You know yours, not ours. Gideon closed his eyes briefly, pained by the boy's hurt and proud of his courage all at once. Eli stepped into the kitchen. After Mama died, Pa worked till his hands bled. June stopped singing. May cried every night. I thought if I acted grown, nobody would notice I was scared. He looked at Clara then, and his face changed. She noticed. Clara pressed a hand to her mouth. Eli turned back to Margaret. You came with trunks and books and questions. She came with soap, bread, and patience. She didn't ask us to love her. She just stayed long enough that we could. May slipped past him and ran to Clara. Gideon moved to stop her from stepping near the glass, but Clara was already there, lifting the child before her bare feet touched the danger. May wrapped both arms around Clara's neck and cried into her shoulder. Mama Clara, May sobbed. The room broke open around those words. Clara went still. She had been called many things in her life. Girl, help, foundling, burden, nobody. Useful when times were good, extra when times were lean. But never that. Never with a child's whole heart pressed against her. Margaret stared at May, then at Clara, and something like shock crossed her proud face. Clara held May close, but her eyes filled with fear. I didn't tell her to call me that. No, Gideon said softly. She chose it. Margaret drew herself up, but her eyes glistened now. She is 4. She does not understand what she is saying. May lifted her tear-wet face. I do. The simple words carried more weight than any grown person's argument. Clara kissed May's hair, then froze again, as if she had forgotten who watched. Slowly she lowered the child into Gideon's arms and stepped back. Mrs. Whitcomb, Clara said, voice shaking, I know I am not Ruth. I know I never could be. I would not steal a dead woman's name, nor her chair, nor her children's memories. But grief left empty places in this house, and those places were hurting them. I only tried to keep them warm. Margaret looked away. For a breath, Clara thought the woman might soften. She saw the tremble at Margaret's mouth, the way one gloved hand went to the silver lily at her breast. Maybe it held Ruth's picture. Maybe it held a curl of her hair. Maybe Margaret had crossed all those miles not only out of pride, but because she had nothing left of her daughter except the right to decide who was worthy to speak her name. Then Margaret's face closed again. Good intentions do not make a family, she said. Gideon handed May to Eli and stepped forward. No, love does day after day, meal after meal, night after night. Margaret met his eyes. And marriage, is that where this is headed? The question struck the room with a force that made Clara's breath catch. Gideon did not answer fast enough. That delay answered for him. Clara stared at the broken jar on the floor. Her heart hammered so hard she could hear it. Marriage had never been spoken, not once, not in the quiet kindnesses, not in the glances over the table, not in the moment his hand had covered hers. It had lived only in the dangerous place where lonely hopes went when Clara was too tired to keep guard. Now Margaret had dragged it into the light. If this moment has you wondering what Clara should do, tell me in your heart whether you would stay and fight, because the truth at this table is only beginning. Margaret turned to Clara. You see, even silence condemns you. A respectable woman would leave before a man's weakness made ruin of his household. Clara's face went pale. Gideon said her name, but she barely heard it. She stepped carefully around the glass and walked to her room. No one followed at first. Perhaps they were too stunned. Perhaps they knew deep down what she had gone to do. Her carpet bag waited under the bed. This time she pulled it out. Her hands moved without feeling. Dress, comb, coin pouch, blue thread. She stopped when the thread touched her palm, small and soft as a child's breath. In the doorway, June whispered, "Clara." Clara turned. All three children stood there now, Eli holding May's hand, June clutching the ribbon. Clara tried to smile, but it broke before it formed. "You ought to sleep." "You're packing," Eli said. "Yes." May began to shake her head. "No." Clara knelt before them, her heart tearing with every breath. "Listen to me. Your grandmother is your blood. She has standing. She can make trouble for your father. I will not be the reason this house is dragged before a judge. I will not be the reason your mama's name becomes town gossip." June's eyes filled. "But you said houses decide." Clara looked down. "I wanted that to be true." Eli's voice turned hard with panic. "So you're leaving because she told you to?" Clara reached for his face, then stopped herself. "Because I know what happens when folks with names fight folks without them." May broke loose and threw herself into Clara's arms. "Don't go, Mama Clara." Clara held her so tight she could hardly breathe. At the end of the hall, Gideon stood in shadow. He had heard, and in his face, Clara saw grief worse than anger. She was not only packing a bag. She was taking herself from the table before anyone else could do it first. Gideon did not step into Clara's room at once. He stood at the end of the hall with one hand on the wall, as if the house itself were the only thing keeping him upright. The lamplight from the kitchen threw his shadow long across the floorboards. Behind him, Margaret waited in the sitting room, stiff and silent. Before him, Clara knelt with May in her arms and her carpet bag open on the bed. For one breath, no one in the house moved. Then Gideon said, "Children, go to the kitchen." Eli's face hardened. "No." "Eli, she'll leave if we go." Clara closed her eyes. Gideon's voice softened, but there was iron under it. "Not if I have breath left to speak." That made Clara look up. May clung tighter to her neck. June's lower lip trembled. Eli stood like a small guard with fear burning behind his eyes. Gideon walked closer, slow and careful, the way he always approached Clara when he knew the past was standing between them. He stopped just inside the doorway. "Clara," he said, "put the bag down." Her hands shook on May's back. "I have to go." "No." The word was not loud. It did not need to be. Clara swallowed. "You heard what she said. She can bring a judge into this. She can make the town look at your children like they are living under shame. I won't be the reason they suffer." "You are not the reason. I am the one she came for." She came because she is grieving and proud and late to a house that already learned to live without her. Clara flinched. "She is their grandmother. And you are the woman who has been here." The words struck her so deeply that for a moment she could not speak. May lifted her wet face. "Stay." Clara kissed her hair and whispered, "Sweetheart." Gideon stepped nearer. "I did wrong by waiting this long to say what needed saying. I thought I was protecting you. I thought, because I hired you first, because you came here with no other roof, I had no right to ask more of your heart than work. I told myself a decent man would keep quiet until you had money of your own and a name in town that did not depend on mine." Clara stared at him. The children went still. "But silence," Gideon said, "has done harm tonight, so I will not let it do more." His eyes moved from the children to Clara, and his voice lowered. "You are not a servant in this house. Not to them, not to me. You have not been for a long while." Clara's breath caught, but fear rose faster than hope. "Don't say things because you pity me." Gideon's face tightened as if the words hurt him. "I pity the life that taught you to hear love and call it pity." May did not understand the words, but she understood the tone. She reached toward Gideon. He took her gently from Clara's arms, then set her beside June. "Kitchen," he said again. "All of you, I need to speak to Miss Finch." Eli looked at Clara. You promise you won't go before we come back. Clara could not promise. That was the terrible part. Her silence made Eli's eyes fill again. Gideon answered for her. She will not leave through a house full of children standing in her way. Go. June took May's hand. Eli waited one moment longer, then followed them down the hall. When they were gone, Clara rose and turned to the bed. She folded one dress with hands that no longer obeyed her. Gideon watched her. Look at me, he said. I can't. Why? Because if I do, I may stay for the wrong reason. And what reason is that? Her hand tightened around the dress. Because I want to. The confession came out small, almost broken. Gideon did not move, but his eyes changed. All the loneliness of the past year, all the tenderness he had held back, all the fear of dishonoring Ruth by living again, seemed to gather in him at once. That is not the wrong reason, he said. Clara shook her head. You don't understand. Wanting has cost me before. Every time I let myself want a place, somebody reminded me it was never mine. I learned to leave before I was thrown out. It hurts less that way. No, Gideon said quietly. It only hurts sooner. Tears filled her eyes. He reached toward the carpetbag, then stopped. May I? Clara nodded once. Gideon closed the bag without removing a thing. Then he set it on the floor between them, not hidden, not taken away, simply set aside. You can leave this house if you choose, he said. I will never bar a door against you. But do not leave because Margaret Whitcomb told you fear was wisdom. Do not leave because some old cruelty in your bones still speaks louder than we do. Clara wiped at her cheek with the back of her hand. We. Yes, Gideon said, we. From the kitchen came a muffled sob. May, no doubt. Then Eli's low voice trying to comfort her. Then June's whisper, gentle and thin. Clara turned toward the sound, as if pulled by a rope. Gideon saw it. They are yours in every way that love can make them. And if a judge says otherwise, then tomorrow we go to town. She looked back at him. We will go to Judge Harrow before Margaret does, Gideon said. We will stand in daylight and speak plain. I will tell him you are under my protection in this house. I will tell him my children are safe, fed, schooled, and loved. I will tell him no one who ignored their grief for a year has the right to tear them from the one who helped them heal. Clara's voice trembled, and Margaret. She may speak too. She has money. I have the truth. Truth does not always win. No, Gideon said, but it never wins when good people hide it. The words settled over her, frightening and warm. Clara looked at the bag on the floor, then at the narrow bed, then down the hall toward the children. For years she had survived by being easy to move, fold up, step aside, thank folks for scraps, leave no mark that could be blamed on her later. But this time, leaving would leave a mark deeper than staying ever could. She bent, picked up the carpetbag, and set it back beneath the bed. Gideon closed his eyes for one brief moment. When Clara stepped into the kitchen, all three children turned. May ran to her and wrapped both arms around her waist. June covered her mouth and began to cry without sound. Eli stood stiff, fighting tears like a boy still afraid sorrow might make him small. Clara knelt and opened one arm to June, then the other to Eli. Eli hesitated. Then he came to. Gideon stood in the doorway and watched Clara hold his children, and something in his face looked decided. Behind him, Margaret appeared from the sitting room. Her eyes took in the children gathered around Clara, the carpetbag gone, Gideon standing like a wall between the old life and the new. You are making a mistake, Margaret said. Gideon turned to her. No, I made one by letting this house be judged before it was heard. Margaret lifted her chin. Then we shall let Judge Harrow hear it. We shall, Gideon said. The next morning, under a sky washed clean and bright, the Hale wagon rolled toward Mercy Ridge. Gideon drove with his jaw set. Margaret sat beside him, rigid as church stone. In the wagon bed, Clara held May close while June leaned against her side and Eli sat facing the road behind them, as if guarding against anything that might follow. When the courthouse bell came into view, Clara felt May's fingers slip into hers. A whole town waited beyond that street. And for the first time in her life, Clara Finch did not lower her eyes before entering it. The courthouse in Mercy Ridge was smaller than Clara had imagined, but fear made it feel grand as a palace. Its white paint had peeled near the steps. A bell hung above the door, still and dark against the morning sky. Men paused outside the livery. Women looked through the windows of the mercantile. Word had traveled faster than the Hale wagon, and by the time Gideon helped May down, half the town seemed to know that Ruth Hale's mother had come to take measure of the orphan woman living at Gideon's table. Clara felt every eye. For most of her life, being seen had meant danger. It meant blame was near, or judgment, or a door about to close. But May held one of her hands, June held the other, and Eli walked close at her side. So Clara kept her head up. Judge Harrow heard them in his office, not the courtroom. He was an older man with silver whiskers, tired eyes, and a Bible open on the corner of his desk. He listened first to Margaret Whitcomb, who spoke with careful sorrow and polished words. She spoke of Ruth's blood, Ruth's memory, Ruth's children being raised under uncertain influence. She did not call Clara low, but she shaped every sentence so the meaning stood there just the same. Then Gideon spoke. He did not dress his words fine. He told the judge his children had food, school books, clean beds, and a father who meant to keep them. He told him Clara had been hired honest and treated honest. He told him no law gave a grandmother the right to take children from a fit father because she disliked the woman who cooked their meals and dried their tears. Judge Harrow looked over his spectacles. And Miss Finch, has she anything to say? Clara's heart struck hard. For a moment every old lesson rose in her. Speak little, ask nothing, make yourself small. Then Eli's hand brushed her sleeve, quiet as a match being struck. Clara stood. I don't have family to speak for me, she said. I don't have a fine name. I don't even know if Finch was my mother's name or just one written in a book when nobody knew what else to call me. But I know what children sound like when they cry in the night. I know what it costs a boy to act grown before his time. I know what silence does to a girl who thinks grief is the only way to stay loyal. And I know a little child can forget a face and still need love every morning. Margaret looked away. Clara's voice shook, but she did not stop. I never came to replace Mrs. Hale. I came because there was work. Then I stayed because there was hurt. If loving these children is my offense, I can't make myself innocent of it. The room went still. Judge Harrow leaned back. Before he could speak, Margaret opened the small black purse in her lap. Her fingers trembled as she drew out a folded paper, worn soft at the creases. There is one thing, she said. Gideon's face changed. What is that? Margaret did not look at him. A letter from Ruth, written 2 months before the fever. I kept it because it was the last one. Her voice thinned on the final words. She unfolded it slowly. I meant to read a different part, the part where she said she missed St. Louis, the part where she wished the children knew my house. She swallowed. But last night I read the end again. No one breathed. Margaret read, her proud voice breaking for the first time. She wrote, Mother, Gideon's heart is plain but good. If ever I am gone before my time, do not let your grief make him lonely on purpose. The children will need warmth more than mourning. If some good woman ever loves them kindly, do not hate her for standing where I cannot. The words fell like rain after a long drought. Gideon covered his mouth with one hand. June began to cry. Eli stared at the floor, blinking fast. May leaned against Clara's skirt without understanding all of it, only knowing the room had softened. Margaret folded the letter and pressed it to her chest. I thought keeping Ruth's place empty was the same as keeping her, but perhaps I was only keeping everyone cold. Judge Harrow's voice was gentle. Mrs. Whitcomb, there is no case here. Margaret nodded once. No, Judge, I see that now. Justice did not come with shouting. It came with an old woman's pride lowering at last, and a dead daughter's love speaking through paper worn thin by grief. Outside the courthouse, Margaret stood before Clara in the dusty street. The town watched, but for once Clara did not care. I was unkind to you, Margaret said. Yes, ma'am, Clara answered softly. A faint, sad smile touched Margaret's mouth. You are not easy to flatter. I've had little practice. Margaret looked at the children. May I still come to the table? Clara felt the old fear rise, then pass. If you come as their grandmother, yes. If you come to take them, no. Margaret nodded, fair. That evening the Hale table was full. No one spoke much at first. They were too tired, but the silence was no longer frightened. Margaret sat stiffly beside June, and when May offered her half a biscuit, she accepted it like a gift she did not deserve. After the children slept, Gideon found Clara on the porch. The moon lay over the yard. The barn lantern moved softly in the wind. He took her hands, rough palm against rough palm. I love you, Clara Finch. Not because you saved this house, though you did. Not because the children need you, though they do. I love you because when you were given every reason to stay small, you still made room in your heart for us. Clara's eyes filled. I have money of my own now, he said. A name in town, a place I chose, so ask me plain. Gideon smiled through his tears. Marry me, sit at the head of that table with me, not as help, not as shelter, but as my wife. Clara looked through the window at the table where her plate waited beside his. Yes, she whispered, and no child in this house will ever eat standing apart. They married before the first snow. Years later, folks in Mercy Ridge spoke of Clara Hale's preserves, her full table, her laughing children, and the way she always pulled out an extra chair before anyone asked. She kept one old plate on a shelf near the kitchen window, the first plate she had almost carried to the wash basin. It reminded her that she had been worth a place long before anyone knew enough to offer it. If this story touched a quiet place in your heart, like and subscribe for more emotional Wild West stories where love, pain, and healing meet on the frontier. And on winter nights, when the wind shook the lantern and the children crowded close, Clara would look at that table and remember the truth that changed her life forever. Sometimes home begins with one person brave enough to pull out a chair.